as I said to you, there were 3 key pillars that you need to focus on. And the first one is, how do you find the right home? Now, for a lot of you, you'll think you've got this covered, and maybe you do, but I want to just run through, relatively quickly. The guys are going to chime in when they think I've made a mistake, or, give you some examples as to why it is so important and some of the things that you need to think about, and the strategies that you can perhaps apply to make sure that you're not falling into any of the traps. So the 3 pillars, as I said, we're going to talk about pillar number 1, find. So rule number 1, Greg, is what?
Location.
Rule number 2?
Location.
Rule number 3?
James is always right.
Thank you, good. Also known as location. So that man's getting a pay rise after we're finished here, but we've all heard it. It's location, location, location. So whenever you're thinking about finding a home, you've got to think about location, because that is the number 1 thing. You can't change that. Don't get swayed by a fancy bathroom, a new kitchen, because you can change that in your home. You can't pick up your home and move it to another location. Okay, despite what you've seen on TV shows and big semi-trailers taking it down the road, location is fixed. So really, really important you think about that. Now, there are a few other rules. So what should you be considering? Well, of course, the first thing is location. The second one is finance. Now, that's a pillar in its own right, but really, really important that you understand your budget and what you can afford, because you can't find the right property if you've got champagne dreams and a beer budget. Okay, you've got to match those 2 things together. You've got to think about the physical aspects. So, is it the right size? Is it the right configuration? What are some of the aspects? Do you need to do work to it and so forth? All of those things are important, but you've got to get the location right. You've got to make sure that you've got your budget and your finance set up. And then there's emotional things. So, we often tell you, and I think Greg was teaching us, and I think Lucas also ran through recently about investors, and you can't get too emotionally attached, but there are emotional considerations that you've got to think about, because that is important, whether it be a home that you're going to live in or a home for a tenant of yours. There's certain things that people think of, and you've got to sort of put yourself in the shoes of your tenant as well, and think about how it makes you feel, right? Apparently, it's good to have emotions. I'm devoid of them, but I think, Greg, you'll tell me it is nice to feel good in a home, and
absolutely. You got to, when you walk in, you got to, it's got to feel right.
Yeah.
And sometimes you walk, emotion.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. All right. So when we think of those 4 key things, and then we think about how can we actually consider those. Now, this is not exhaustive, but these are some of the key strategies that we've used time and time again, and have really helped people to narrow down and drill into how they can do it. So the first one is what we call smell the asset. Now, this is all about the location. You've got to go out there, you've got to live, breathe it, feel it, check it, test it. So if you already live there, then great, you probably already know it, and you can focus in more on that particular street. But, Greg likes to go to the local cafe. He likes to go have a look what's around. Lucas likes to look at the nightlife and find, the sights and sounds. Jack likes to go and have a look at the neighbours and so forth. All of these things are important, because ultimately, when you're looking at an open home, real estate agents, these guys are all real estate agents. They pick the best time, the best angle, the best light, everything to be perfect conditions. In fact, if you've got Mrs. Mangle next door, they'll even pay Mrs. Mangle to go away for an hour there, right? They'll take her out to lunch, whatever it is. So you need to go beyond just that open home and get to know the location, because remember, rule number 1, location. Rule number 2, location. Rule number 3, location. Really, really critical, because you cannot change that. So make sure you get out there, you live it, you feel it, and see, does that make sense for your lifestyle? And is it what you thought it was when you went to the open home? The second one, picture the perfect home. Now, the reason why this is important, and it's often something that you need to do before you go out and you start looking, you need to work out what must you have in a home. What would be nice to have, and what doesn't really matter. Now, the reason why it's important to do this before is that we get swayed. Again, these real estate agents, they're crafty buggers. They'll convince you that you need a big pool. They'll convince you that you need this kitchen. They'll convince you that you need a butler's pantry. Hey, guess what? I don't cook. The kitchen doesn't even get used at my house, so I don't need all of this fancy stuff. And that's where you can really get swayed. And, you know, I know, Greg, we've talked about this a few times, that people start telling you, you know, you've met with them, you see them again a couple of months later, they still haven't found, and they've said, oh, no, I must have this, this, this. And you say, but last week you told me this.
Yeah. We often get people coming into the apartments and you actually can see that they actually don't know what they want. They're coming in there just to look around, and then you go, well, what do you actually want? And as you say, so know what you want before you start looking.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean you can't change as you go through and realize what you want, but it's something about having a bit of a discipline, and it's written down on a bit of paper. It can be a sock, it can be grandma's homework, it can be whatever it is, but something you can refer back to and say, well, I've now gone from something I said I didn't really need to now that's essential. Have I just been swayed by pretty pictures and looking at things, or is that really what I need? Budget, okay? As I said, that's a whole pillar in its own right, but really understand the difference between a hard cap for your budget versus where you can stretch to. So, you know, it's important when we talk about budget, you know, Lucas, I know some people come in and say, this is my budget, and you're showing them 1 bedrooms, and then all of a sudden they want to see a 2-bedroom, a 3-bedroom, and before you know it, you sold them a $5 million penthouse. That's where I guess people are very different between that's the maximum I can spend versus this is what I would like to spend. So that's something that you've got to really think about and understand as well.
Yeah, look, 100% right. A lot of people come in and then they realize what they had written down on a piece of paper, and when they actually visit and walk through the right property, price all of a sudden becomes secondary.
So I was just checking, is those blue lights on? Hopefully the guys' voices are booming like mine. I don't think the microphone was on, and that was my job to check. So hopefully that's been heard. All right, number 4, bigger isn't always better. Okay, now, just because we think having a big home would be better, more bedrooms, more bathrooms, more space, it isn't always better. You know, it does take up a hell of a lot more time. And do you really need these spaces? Or are they spaces that you can use as shared spaces? So later, the guys are going to run through some different options and why some of these shared spaces can be more beneficial to you and better suited. But just remember, bigger isn't always better. Location is far more important. Think about how you live in that home and your lifestyle. Focus on the fundamentals. Now, this is almost the number 1 strategy you could think about. So, you know, when we talk about fundamentals, this is where you've got to think about things like, oh, I don't like that carpet. That can be changed, that can be replaced. But things like the number of bedrooms, you know, its aspect, how it's facing, its view, the location, they're all fundamental. You cannot change those, but you can change carpet. You know, oh, I don't like the kitchen, it's a bit old. You can change that. You know, you really got to focus in on those fundamentals, the key things that you can't change, because that is what's going to make the difference between finding the right home, slaying that problem that we talked about at the start, versus feeling trapped and unhappy with what you've done. Plan for the long term, okay? I think, Greg, you and I talked about how to keep your first home as an investment property the other week.
Absolutely. Yep.
And that's really thinking about planning for the long term. So, you know, not only for how your family and your life might change and grow, and often you can't afford your perfect family home on day 1. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying stop, but just think about the long term and think about go into it in mind of either keeping this home forever as something that you live in, or keeping it forever and flipping it into an investment property. Now, it may not work out that way, but there's things like, you know, you can get caught up on putting your own personal touches, having, you know, pink walls and lights, but that doesn't work for investors.
And a lot of the time, as you're saying, be sensible. See it as a stepping stone. If you can't afford that very big property, know that this is a stepping stone to grow into something else. And as you say, keep it then potentially as an investment property, grow your wealth and allow that property to get you into the next level where you want to be.
Okay. Next one, don't put your expectations too high. Now, as a father, I will always tell my daughters to expect the best from everything, expect to be treated like they deserve. So hopefully they're not listening. It is school holidays. Maybe they're listening because they love their dad so much. Probably not. But it is important. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that you should settle. But you've got to be realistic and don't expect too much. You know, it's a factor of budget. It's a factor of location. It's a factor of the type of property. It's all of these things together. You've got to really set your expectations at the correct level. Otherwise, you're never going to do anything and you're going to be continually disappointed. Now, Lucas says that all the time to me. He says, set your expectations. Don't go too high. I don't want to have to sell too much this month. Just be happy with 1 or 2 sales. But, you know, that's something that often, you know, you guys have people come in and they're looking for this big home, multiple bedrooms, bathrooms, views, facilities, everything, but their budget's just not in match. And, you know, I think you asked them how long you've been doing this, and you once said, I've been looking since 1993 or something.
True, close to that, true. But, and again, James, this is where on piece of paper, things look totally different than when you actually walk through. It's not, almost every single home I've sold, it's not about the size. People are surprised when they walk in and see a livable space, the right layout. All of a sudden, they were looking for double the size, but they said, this is perfect for us.
Okay, good. Picture living in it. So remember I said at the start, picture your perfect home. Picture living in it. This is where the emotional things come into play. Now, this isn't about making yourself feel good. It isn't about necessarily just saying, wow, this is perfect. It's also thinking about why you think this is the right home for you. So, you know, if you're set on a particular place because it has a home cinema, picture how you're going to live in there and picture yourself using that home cinema. Because maybe you hate movies, maybe you're deaf, maybe you're blind, maybe you love going out to the cinema, whatever it is. It's really, really important that you picture that, you understand it, so you can work out, are you just being swayed by the look and the feel and so forth, but it's not actually something that's important to you. So remember I said you've got to know your must-haves, nice to have, and doesn't really matter. Then when you think you've found the right place, go back and imagine how you're going to live in there and compare that to whether they actually matter. And that's some way that can really go down. Whilst it's an emotional part of thinking how you're going to live there, it's also using that more rational part of your brain to understand that emotional feeling that I'm feeling, is it actually something that is important to me and I must have? Lastly, I know you'll all be shocked by this. Prices go up, prices go down. The market goes in cycles. It goes up, it goes down, it will chop and change. There is no perfect time to buy a home. There is just the right time at the right time. So what I mean by that is, don't worry whether you think, oh, I've got to wait because prices are going to go down, because prices go up again. You know, we talk about thinking for the long term. What you've got to do is make sure you focus in on those fundamentals that we talked about. Think about all of these strategies so that you're getting the right home for you at this particular time. You know, we talk about it all the time, that we say it's not about timing the market, it's time in the market. And that's what's really, really important there, because you'll never, ever pick the perfect time. You know, there's nothing worse than thinking, I'm going to wait till prices are going down, I think, and then they keep going down more, okay? Because you're only going to feel bad because you didn't buy when you wanted it because you were waiting for prices, or waiting for the prices to go down and they go up, okay? If that's your strategy, it's fundamentally flawed, because you are never, ever going to get anything done. Okay.
Can I add
Yes,
something?
of course you can, Greg.
Okay. When we talk about also pricing going up and down, you'll probably find when we talk about that, we're talking about rectification. Sometimes we'll get prices spiking and then they'll be leveling out going. But ultimately, if you look at the graph, as you said, time in the market, the graph over the longer term is that. It continually goes up with dips. And so if you're waiting for it to do that, it's not going to happen. As James said, get in when it's right for you. That's when you get in, because in the long term, it's going to be the right investment.
Okay, these are a couple of mistakes. I think most of them we've touched on, but I just want to highlight a few key mistakes that people make. Not knowing what they can afford. Okay, simple. You've got to know what you can afford, otherwise you'll go nowhere. Lacking vision. You know, really, really important, as I said, once you know the location is right, you've got to understand, be able to have that vision and say, well, you know what? this is where I'm going to live. How much time am I going to spend? You know, how good is this going to be able to walk to work, or, you know, walk down to the beach and have a swim? Whatever it is, you've got to be able to have that vision and understand and picture yourself living in there. Overlooking important flaws. Okay. Don't think that everything is perfect. All right. Sometimes we get so caught up by, oh, wow, how amazing is this pool? We forget we're living on the railway line. Okay. Now, if you're deaf, maybe that's okay. But for most people, they've got to come to terms with the fact that you've got a train coming past every 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it is, 24 hours a day through the middle of the night, freight trains, passenger trains, whatever it is. Don't overlook those flaws because you get swayed by other things. But just as importantly, don't let yourself get caught by what you think are big flaws that aren't really. You know, remember what I said, a little thing like a kitchen, sure, it's not cheap, but you can change that over time. So don't let that stop you, as opposed to things like a train line that's not going to move. You know, a busy road, the fact that you might have a building right in front of you that you can't see anything, they're not going to change. Keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. What do I mean by this? Don't listen to a word Greg says, only listen to Lucas. No, I'm joking. What I mean by this is understand your location, understand who lives there, understand what they're looking for. So remember I said you've got to go and smell the asset, you've got to get to know it and really feel that it's right for you, but also understand the rest of the people that live there. So if you do decide to keep that home long term, you don't end up buying a 5-bedroom home in an area that's densely populated with students that are looking for 1-bedroom studios, maybe 2-bedroom apartments. You've got to understand that so that even if you do decide to make that decision, you know that you've got a limited market. Preferably, you make sure that you get the right location and the right type of home for that location. All right, anything else you guys want to add to this before we move through?
Point actually, because I've spoken with a lot of people.
I know it's just because I told everyone not to listen to Greg.
Yeah. You've got me going now. Look, I've spoken with a lot of people, and it's surprising, like you said, it's very important to know where you're living, because a lot of the people saying, you know what, I was going to buy a property, didn't realize they've got a hotel attached to it, or they're running, you know, Airbnb, like the whole building, like 30 levels. And they don't like the wild partying people that go there for the weekend. You know, they want a different lifestyle. So it's important to understand something might look good on the outside, but find out exactly as much information as you can about it, because it's very important especially if you're planning to live there long term.
Okay, good. Now, that's how you find the right home.